Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Sam and this is The Lonely Chapter, a show where we speak to interesting people, finding out their stories, discovering what motivates them, whilst also learning from their highs and their lows. Today we are learning from Dave Ferguson. Dave worked for 25 years in the civil service and has recently founded the Integrated Martial Arts, or the IMA Method, the only martial arts program designed exclusively for middle-aged men's needs. Expect to find out what Dave has learned from over 40 years being involved with martial arts, why he decided to focus specifically on middle-aged men when creating the IMA method, and how traumatic experiences have helped shape who Dave is today. Thank you for listening. This one was made for your enjoyment. Dave, firstly, thank you for coming on today and looking forward to speaking to you about everything you've got. You've got over 40 years experience in martial arts, which spans 6 disciplines. Do you remember what it was that originally stood out to you about martial arts and drew you to the sport?
Yeah, I think if I go back to at least the 40 years and possibly even a few years before that, um, probably from the early 70s, actually, influenced from Bruce Lee and my brother. And Bruce Lee was kind of a global phenomena and kind of changed the landscape really on how we saw martial arts, how we actually saw Asian men. And he kind of changed the traditional landscape. So I was pretty young at the time. So my brother was into martial arts. So I kind of followed him really in many ways and wanted to be the new Bruce Lee
Yeah.
type thing. So I was around 15 when I did my first martial arts, and it was a Korean martial art, Tang Soo Do, kind of a mixture of traditional, actually Chinese kung fu and Taekwondo from South Korea. And I did that for about a year, and it was during that kind of adolescent period where you're kind of looking for a bit of identity anyway, and felt slightly lost to some extent, coming near the end of school and not sure about your career choices and them type sort of things.
Mm.
And martial arts, as it always has been, kind of supported me through some of these challenging moments in my life. And to be fair, it's done that ever since. After about a year or so of the Korean martial art Tang Soo Do, I went on to a Chinese martial art known as Lao Ga. And that kind of brought on some of the more traditional Chinese, what we call five animal styles, which probably had some more similarity to your kind of Bruce Lee, and eventually sort of coming on to like Jackie Chan as well in the early 80s. And as much as I love that and did it for many years and love the traditional aspect of it, I'm kind of a research based evidence type guy. And there was some challenges, particularly during the early 90s, around the effectiveness of some of these traditional martial arts. And it was
Yeah.
around two schools around combat and self-defense. Did they actually do what it said on the tin? Someone came and attacked you or whatever. Could you do some of these complex moves to defend yourself? And I think if you're at a extremely high level, you probably could. But for the average person, it probably didn't quite work and wasn't very effective.
Mm.
And that really bugged me a lot, actually, and was a bit disappointing. And eventually, my school, my teacher and school, and my brother went on to kickboxing, stroke Thai boxing. Now, there are some fundamental differences for the layperson, probably doesn't make that much difference, if I'm honest with you. So I won't necessarily go into it.
Hmm.
But it did answer that question, particularly around self defense and to some extent combat. Because the first martial art that I really then started to get into more into actually combat fighting as well. And from a self defense point of view, it's probably more effective as well, proven, not necessarily tested. Because one of the great things about the martial arts, when I first started, I felt I probably had a bit of anger, was a little bit lost, maybe suffered a bit of not maybe suffered a bit of racism during the sort of mid 80s. So
Mm.
it was kind of a revenge thing. I'm going to learn this martial arts. I'm going to be as great as Bruce Lee, and I'm going to be kicking and chopping everyone all over the place who looks at me dodgily or something. Um, it never quite worked like that, actually. And one of the great things about all the martial arts, I've talked about 3 or 4 of them already, but about all of them is that kind of self-defense, respect for self, respect for others, and respect for the art. So ironically, prior to learning the martial arts, I got myself in a few little scrapes and scraps, as it were. Um, some possibly deserved, and maybe quite a few not in hindsight. But ironically, when I learnt the martial arts pretty much from the beginning, because my first teacher made it very clear that if any of us harm anyone in any way, we'll have to deal with him. And he was deadly serious. And that was a kind of an early lesson to say this is not what martial arts is for. And throughout my 40-year martial arts career, I try and get this right. I don't think I've ever been involved in a physical altercation because you've got that self-respect, you've got that
Yeah.
respect for others, and of course you have a huge amount more confidence. You know, a lot of young men and even middle-aged men still are sort of they feel insulted. They need to prove their masculinity, their strength. They feel they're being, disrespected, and then that's the solution. And martial arts has always provided that level-headed base.
Yeah.
Um, and as the years went on, mixed martial art explosion around the sort of late 90s. One of the main things I loved about that as well, and what really got me into that, was it brought the best of all the martial arts together and could almost prove which was the most effective in the best situation. I mean, in the UFC, it was more of a combat context, but for us martial arts purists, it was a real clear base to say, hey, this is what actually works. There's always been a bit of a battle in martial arts, which is the best, a
Yeah.
kind of dominant school between stand up and sort of ground fighting. You may know a little bit about that some yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and really, what it came down to was it was the best use of a combination of martial arts.
Mm.
So, without knowing that at the time, that was probably some shoots of the integrated martial arts method.
Mm.
Because what I did, so we're going right up to sort of COVID period now, still doing the martial arts. I started to do MMA, including jujitsu. And there was no way you could practice at the dojo anymore. You'd sort of lost that kind of social aspect, meeting up with mainly lads and punching and kicking each other and having hugs afterwards and just having a laugh and all this type of thing.
Yeah.
Very lonely. So a lot of the aspects of the martial art I'd lost. So while I was training at home, they weren't quite working in the same way or having the same effect that they once did, which was quite problematic. So I started to look into how could I make my particular training regime more effective, because
Mm.
by then I'm well in my 40s, late 40s. The body's not quite the same either. And as I said, we're losing some of these other aspects of it. So I started to integrate some of the traditional arts that I spoke about with some of the contemporary arts that I was doing. And it kind of answered the first step, enjoyment. I started to enjoy it again, remembering some of the old techniques and stuff, mixing in with some of the newer stuff. So that was kind of step
Yeah.
one. The second step was the social aspect. So instead of just doing things at home all the time, I started to train in the park. And I started to see other men and stuff doing their own kind of training and stuff, started to talk to them. We started to share kind of some of the issues and started to have that kind of social connection. And that was probably the first time I started to share what some of the exercises and training, new training patterns that I'd started to work with. And I
Mm.
continued to do that over quite a long period. And obviously, particularly during COVID, things were quite challenging from a mental health perspective, emotional, particularly in the role that I was in as a civil servant at the time as a middle manager, working with directors and other senior managers. Trying to get the vaccination out in the prison system, for example, was an immense high pressure situation. So not only the training physical side of it, I knew there needed to be a well-being aspect to it, which always has been in martial arts
Mm.
anyway. If you go right back, I mean, you could go back as far as you want. The first martial arts around 648 BC, Pancration, which is more of a mixed martial art, boxing, wrestling, and low
Okay.
kicks, about 3,000 years ago. But from a more meditative perspective, if we look at the Shaolin monks who helped teach the Japanese samurais, they
Right.
leaned on the Zen Buddhist monk principles of mindfulness and meditation and relaxation. So I realized then, while it's quite a new concept to us, things like mindfulness, this has been in the martial arts world for at least a minimum of 1,200 years. So there was nothing to change there. It was just about resetting that mindfulness aspect and bringing that
Mm,
into this new method. So I
yeah,
relied on that traditional, approach, but also a new neurological aspects as well for the golden age of neurology as well.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
kind of my long-term picture, how I got to this stage and started to integrate the different martial arts, but specifically some of them for the well-being and the mental health needs, because my body started to change, get a bit floppy. And I knew there was areas around the core, that protection of the organs that needed to be addressed slightly better. And I
yeah,
started for the first time to share that with my colleagues in work who were stressed and under pressure. And that was probably the
yeah.
first time I actually started to share some of the method with others.
That's awesome. Yeah. Really nice insight into your whole journey into it and your journey through it, and obviously to where you are today. And we're going to touch on your method and a bit more into that in a moment. But just looking back on that time that you did the martial arts, obviously you spoke there about the sort of mental, the level headedness that you get from it. Obviously, there's physical elements. What else did you learn about yourself during that journey? Is there anything that really sticks out to you that you look back on and you think martial arts made me that way?
I think the thing is for me, it was it was the capacity to manage my personality, if you like. We're all unique in our own ways. So if you look at the sort of initial, like I spoke earlier at that initial when I first started, um, there was so much going on personally from a sort of adolescence perspective, from a cultural perspective, a social perspective that were immensely challenging for me personally. And the martial arts provided that wider understanding, kind of what I was going through, and provided the resources to manage it. And if I'll go right back to the more recent sort of the COVID period, it's kind of the same thing again, in so much as you had all these challenges, these external challenges that I, as well as others, were really struggling with. And okay, it wasn't immediately, but eventually that integration of different martial arts to manage them particular challenges. And in this case, it was more the change in body.
Mm,
I've always been relatively fit or fitish, but the traditional martial arts weren't quite covering it. But by integrating this different sets and different training and different patterns, ignoring the dominant discourse around this is better, that one's better, this is, that was never going to fulfill me and my needs as a middle-aged man regarding my physical health and some of the professional challenges. But the integration of different martial arts, the new training and the different ways of putting them together, again, managed to answer some of these really complex, challenging questions.
mm.
My colleagues were like all completely shocked because they were like, what's going on here? We're sort of sweating buckets over this new policy, over this change, over getting the vaccination in the system, over having, 3 children at home, one has special needs and learning. We're all over the place, and you're coming in and you're laughing and smiling and having the time of your life. And I said, well, this is what I do. Give it a go yourself. See how you get on.
And touching there on, so obviously you spoke about the different disciplines that you've studied and you've trained in. One of the ones that has come up over recent years a lot more, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, BJJ. I myself have taken part in that recently as well, and I believe you've sort of started to do a little bit of that as well. What do you think it is about that that's appealing to people at the moment?
There's a few things. It's probably relatively new, compared to, like I said, the same sort of the kung fu's, the karates, tansudu to some extent. They have been in the sort of Western space, probably
Mm,
for a lot longer. Again, Bruce Lee influence, although Bruce Lee had some sort of takedown type, basic kind of MMA type principles as well into his stand-up techniques, but not as much, not as popular as lauded. And I would certainly say the MMA revolution as well really brought forward jiu-jitsu as a prominent form of the art, because it's been quite prominent in UFC stroke MMA for the last 20, 30 years. And
Yeah.
also, it's incredibly effective. We talked about that evidence base, what actually works. It's really, really effective. Um, we could argue all day about whether it's more effective than stand up or not. I think it would depend on the
Mm.
individual, what suits them best, use a combination of them, whether you're talking a combat sense or a keep fit and well-being sense, because there's absolutely no doubt about it. They kind of would touch on different muscles and different areas. You know, you could be a really fit sort of stand-up fighter. You do 5 minutes of jujitsu, and you think, "My God, I've never felt these muscles before," and to some extent, vice versa. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, it's partly to do with the MMA dominance and its effectiveness,
Yeah.
because we know certainly through MMA and let's say UFC in this case, and I'm not here to promote the UFC, but it's the most dominant MMA
Yeah.
organization. We see the effectiveness of it in real life situations.
So let's dig into the IMA, the your integrated martial arts method a bit more. So, what made you think this is something that we need? This is something that I can deliver. What's different about it? What does it offer to those middle-aged men that you're helping?
Yeah, so for me, as I touched upon during the COVID period, while I was still doing my martial arts training, um, and I think I probably made it clear already how much I love and respect the martial arts. It didn't quite have the same impact that it did before. Now, some of that was not the martial arts fault. Some of that was because of the current government restrictions, and you couldn't go to the gym and that type of thing. But equally, as brilliant as the martial arts are, if you practice them for a long period of time into your middle age, that's one thing and probably can be still quite effective. But if you're a middle-aged man and you're starting that martial arts now, while you could absolutely get some benefits from it, which is fantastic, and I talked about some of the mindfulness, for example, you can still get some of that, and my God, it's needed in these times. People seem quite stressed and panicked and under pressure and all these type of things. So they've been doing that for a long time. So yeah, they do it and they do it very, very well, whether that's through Tai Chi or some of the martial arts we've already mentioned. But there was nothing specifically for middle-aged men. And I'd been a middle-aged man for 13 years or something by then. So I thought I would use what I think is beneficial. Obviously, I was getting that social cue from people who saying, what's going on here? So it wasn't really planned in that sense, that that's where I was going to go. Some extent, it was kind of natural, ad hoc, because it was only once I started to put the different exercises together that started to change my physique again back to something similar when I was younger. And as much as the physical part's important, what I recognized straight away was people were noticing lots of other subtle things. It was, it was your mood, it was your humor, it was your skin, it was the brightness in your eyes. It was quite subtle stuff that people were noticing. And that's when I sort of shared my first like kind of WhatsApp video, because I shared it with a couple of colleagues, one director I was working with, and then one other senior manager, who were both incredibly stressed.
Mm.
And I shared it verbally what I was doing, and they were like, "Oh well, can we do it?" And I said, "Yeah, of course you can. You just do this in the morning, and you do that, and you do this exercise, and try and do that." And a couple of them went ahead and did that. And I think by about the third person, they pretty much forgot what I said. So I shot the first video, terrible amateur, sort of terrorist type video in the dark. And yeah, and that was kind of once I saw the benefits, then people were coming back to me within weeks saying, feel much better now. I'm sleeping slightly better. My wife's laughing at my jokes again. That was probably the first time where I started to really theorize and think, okay, I'm going to work with this group, because the first 6 or 7 people were all middle-aged men. And now that again was
Mm.
kind of just happened to some extent. So by about the seventh, eighth person, I thought this is something very serious here. So I would start to do something a bit more structural and orderly from there. And it just ended up being middle-aged men. I thought I knew middle-aged men better than anyone else. You know, I've had friends of mine and say, why not middle-aged women, for example? Well, I think I understand some of the challenges and changes that middle-aged women may have. I'm married to one.
Mm.
But I don't know. I don't know. I never ever will know
Yeah.
exactly what it's like to go through a woman going. I might not know exactly what it's like for every one of my clients going through either, but I'd have a far, far, far better idea. And of course, the more the evidence base builds, because everyone is a bit different, you know, and every time you think you've got it sussed, you haven't. I remember one of my early clients. This is probably when I first started getting to a bit of neurological aspects as well, because they were very engaged right from the beginning. They'd heard about what I was doing, and so they want to know more, and they're ready to start, and they want to do it. They'll do everything, and just let me know what to do. And I just thought this is fantastic. So I said, yeah, you do this and that. They went off at a million miles an hour and completely crashed about 3 weeks later. And I probably didn't get that
Mm.
to some extent why that was, because I thought it was brilliant. And that was, I suppose, one of the first time I really to bring that neurological aspect in, because this individual had ADHD kind of issues from young, which sort of carried on
Right.
into their adulthood. So while they were really hyper at the beginning, they dropped pretty quickly. So it was really to start to understand individuals who start at a million miles an hour and need to be sort of leveled out a little bit, and others who really don't think they'll ever be able to change. They're too busy, they're too stressed, they're too old, they've got too much aches and pains, and they just can't do it. And they need that little lift up
Mm.
to sort of get them going alongside this total sort of rejuvenated path. Um, and my main program is actually just associated just for more leaders, business owners, self-employed people, because they seem to be the group that have sort of quite unique challenges, which I was obviously part of only up to like about 6 months ago. So again, I felt I had that first-hand knowledge and evidence that would be the most effective for that particular group.
Yeah. What I really like about it as well is you talk a lot about the mental side of things, and obviously the physical side and getting people moving is a big thing at the minute and very important. But the mental health side of things and the benefits that you get from martial arts, again, you've already spoken about it a bit, and I've experienced it by doing jiu-jitsu. Like when you're on the mats and someone's trying to choke you out and they're stronger than you, they're bigger than you, you know they're going to get it, but you can't think of anything else. So whatever you walk in
Yes.
with, you can't think about it whilst you're in that moment, and then you sort of have that hour session not thinking about the things. You come out and you just feel a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more free, and you can reassess those thoughts as they come back. So you spoke again about the civil service career. So you did 25 years in the civil service. You must have crossed paths with quite a lot of interesting people during that time and during that role. Did you learn anything about the people that's helped you where you are now, it's helped you as you're training people?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the thing is for me, when I look back at my whole career, and certainly the civil service as well, but even before that, I, alongside that martial arts from around 40 years ago, to my 41st year, I've always had this kind of supporting, caring aspect to myself as well. And eventually I kind of married the two together. So it was quite interesting because since I've been doing this IMA work, particularly in my sort of local community, I'm sort of based in Hertfordshire. A lot of my old school friends have seen what I'm doing and they're sort of, yeah, fantastic. This is great. You know, it's really, really helpful. Keep up the good work. You know, you do touch people in really, I'm not just going to sound very good here. Might not quite sound right, but you touch people in really weird ways, different ways. That doesn't probably sound brilliant, but I think I know what you mean. Um, and it was interesting because a lot of my school friends that I'd spoke to recently, they started telling me about stories about how I'd helped them or supported the class when the teacher had said something was unfair or there was a new school policy or something like that. And I would be the one that maybe get people together or would be the voice of the class to challenge the teacher. And while I remembered the odd moment, one or two incidents, there was several that I didn't even remember. And it completely, people have just remembered it, as I said, 30, 40 years later, how helpful it was for them, or I helped their little sister or something. And I thought, I mean, I couldn't even remember half of it. But it's actually wonderful to hear. And then when I started work, I had a lot of sort of very boring, sort of menial jobs. And one of the longer jobs I had was working at Vauxhall Motors, part of the General Motor Empire, car production. And it was a very boring sort of job.
Mhm.
You fit a little bit on a car and you move along and you fit a little bit and you do it about 500 times a day. And surprise, surprise, it didn't stimulate me. But what did stimulate me during that period, again, was this kind of caring, supporting role and understanding different characters and how they interact with each other and getting the best out of characters, knowing how to sort of get the best out of the technological guy, the humorous guy, the strong, protective big
Mm.
man, all them different characters that you have in a sort of groups of guys or gangs or posses or whatever on earth you want to call them. And I remember you had to sort of ask to go to the toilet because you're sort of strapped to the line, and people used to go in there and take a little bit longer than they should. And Vauxhall's idea was to take the lids off the toilets and just have the little ring bit throughout the whole factory. Incredibly nasty, incredibly unhealthy,
Yep.
and it turns out illegal, or certainly cut across a European directive. So I used to get
Oh,
myself in
wow.
a bit of trouble. Again, not stimulated through the job, finding other ways to sort of enjoy yourself. They were the days you could go to, you'd have your own sports bar in the factory. You'd go and have a few drinks at lunchtime and then come back, things like that. I think I came back late once, got myself in a bit of trouble, and they talked about health and safety, even though everyone was drinking all the time and all that type of thing. It was just that standard culture. So I then hit them back with the same health and safety aspect about these toilet seats, and they wouldn't have it, and it went to high level. I eventually meted managers from Germany, which was the headquarters, and eventually even Detroit. Um, and I kind of did that on myself. The union gave me a little bit of help, but then backed off. Management gave a little bit of help, but then backed off. It was just very politically hot. And cut a long story
Yeah.
short, I eventually got all the toilet seats reinstated. I think it was about £300,000 cost at the time, throughout every single toilet in Luton and our sister plant in Ellesmere Port. And I was a bit of a hero for that as well. And it just made me realize that's probably where I wanted to be, that kind of supportive, caring aspect. So once I left Vauxhall, it closed down. It's interesting. We started there with 12,000 people, and we left there with 3,000. And when you talk
Wow.
about identity and masculine identity, certainly for my era, a lot of it was associated with our careers, which is completely gone now. Um, and that's a kind of another story I think we do touch on a little bit for people retiring early, loss of identity, which is quite common with some of the clients that I work with, kind of find their space again,
Mm.
if you like. So when I went on to the civil service eventually, again, there was that caring aspect. I was a probation officer. Don't know if most people know what that is. Everyone knows what police officer is. But we would manage people through the courts, either coming from prison or being sentenced for community disposal. So it could be relatively minor to quite serious offences. But the point was, again, from a caring, supporting role, I would help these individuals as an offender manager or probation officer to sort of change their life for the better, in,
Mm.
in, in a nutshell. Didn't always work, really challenging, lots of huge challenges. But the point was that was my role. That's what I was quite good at. I got nominated and won various national awards and all this type of thing. Um, and it's just that's kind of part of me. Yes, you were learning the theories and the practices, but I do feel there's something probably natural or whatever you want to call it. That's just part of me. And then when I went onto the civil service headquarters, I was doing policies, but again, a lot of the policies were around change, support, um, making sure people are sort of evidence based, managed in the best way, what's the most effective, what the challenges are, how you support people to make that change, liaising with different bodies. So really the martial arts and that support care through challenges and needs kind of almost married with the integrated martial arts, because most of the martial artists that I know and people that I've trained with over the years, they've all got into support fighters and have their own class and stuff, which is amazing. Well, I won't go into details, but I've got a lot of family in that space.
Yeah.
But I never quite felt that was the right route for me. And it slightly bothered me because I thought, why? I've been in martial arts for 20, 30 years. Why would I want to help others? But I think I've found that space now.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure this is exactly what I should have been doing. And I sort of understand a little bit more why I didn't go that route now.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like you looked back at the things you enjoyed about, even like you say, a job that wasn't that stimulating, but you can pick out which parts of it did you enjoy, and obviously you're using that now, which is really nice. What made you change the career path after being in that job for so long? So 25 years is a long time for any career. What changed? What did you decide to move?
So there was a few things really. I would say partly I had a condensed period of traumatic experiences prior to leaving, a few years before I left the civil service.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I'd started to slowly develop um, the IMA method. And then I think finally, which we've touched on a little bit, it was probably the evidence base, that proven evidence base, which is so important to me to know if something does actually work. So I'll start in the reverse. So working with people as a probation officer and then delivering policies out to the prison and probation service, sometimes affecting up to sort of 250,000 people, and working with individual clients, having a caseload of completely ridiculous caseload of maybe sort of 70, 80 people, which makes it incredibly hard to manage.
Mm.
The problem with that was I never knew, certainly officially, how effective I was. I think I helped some people, and some people came back and said, "Thanks so much. I'm now doing this. I'm now doing that," which was wonderful to hear. Some people completely in a complete mess, and to see that change over a year or two. Knowing all the challenges they may have had with drugs, violence, victims themselves, housing issues, etc., and to manage to change their life around with some sort of support and guidance from me was an amazing thing. But over the bigger piece, I never knew how much people I was helping 1%, 5%, 30%. I just didn't know. And that bugged me without a shadow of a doubt. And I think I know now, fairly concrete, how much clients I've seen, how well they've changed, what work still needs to be done, what I can learn from each case. It's there in black and white, and I absolutely love that. Um, and I think the traumatic experiences I went through, they were quite condensed. So I think I'm quite resilient, like most blokes do, and I write lists, and I'm fine. I just do this and that, and I should be okay. And yeah, to some extent that might work. But these traumatic experiences over a condensed period, you never quite got over the last one before the next one arrived. And it really tested me without a shadow of a doubt. And that started off from a friend being really physically harmed, suffering a high level brain damage. And that's
Mm.
probably influenced some of my neurological kind of, desire to learn more and more and more.
Yeah.
And then following that, my auntie passed. And it's funny, I was listening to a couple of your podcasts recently, and there's a really excellent piece around bereavement as well.
Mm.
And I think that is also something that I do address with a lot of my middle-aged men, actually. Not much fun, but the only reason I do that because sometimes it's just part of our reality. If we're
Yeah.
40, 50, 60, our parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, and in some case peers, regrettably, will pass on during these moments.
Yeah.
So some of that well-being and emotional awareness is quite important throughout the program that could at least touch on some of them areas that are likely to happen. My auntie suffered from dementia as well, so again, brain
Right.
related, and it's a horrific disease.
Yeah.
Some really good
Absolutely.
evidence recently on some new treatments for brain health as well, actually, around
Okay.
Alzheimer's that only come out quite recently. Although it doesn't look like the NHS through NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, will be recommending it, which is disappointing because
Okay.
of the cost. Um, but yeah, that's a slightly another story. I think they may change on that a little bit. There's a new blood test in the pipeline as well. They've got to do some more research on as well, which can detect up to 90% accuracy but it has to be at the early stage, often
Yeah.
5, 10, 15 years before actually the signs are there. So that's a real lesson again for brain health, optimizing that health now, today, not when you
Yeah.
first start getting the symptoms or that diagnosis. So yeah, so auntie passing. Then I had an incident with the police, which was a public order offence for me officially. But for me, I would class it as an assault by 5 police officers on one person,
Yeah.
um, while my children were actually being physically assaulted, and I was being sprayed continuously with CS spray. Incredibly
Yeah.
awful experience. And that kind of messed up again. I hadn't covered from the second one, messed up a bit my masculinity. I couldn't protect my children. And bear in
Yeah.
mind, I'm working for a civil service for 25 years, and this is part of the civil service. So that kind of, I knew there's weaknesses within the system, but that was like,
Yeah.
oh dear, after 25 years, this is where we're at. I'm not sure if I'm quite making the difference, I hope. And then finally, I had a real serious health condition as well around my male privates. I'm not going to go into
Yeah.
details with that, but just that message to men out there. You know, many men often have their hands down that area anyway. So while you're doing that, have a little proper health check as well.
Yeah.
Because great things like the great news is things like testicle cancer, if it's detected early,
Yeah.
huge high success rates of operations, huge high success rate of not returning. So there's no excuse. If you just leave it, and ignore it and think it won't happen to you, then you can find yourself back into a bit of trouble. So there's that preventative aspect again. So after that sort of them complex traumatic experiences, the martial arts again seem to at least be part of that support base. I did seek some professional support because at that stage I think I needed it, and I
Mm.
wasn't embarrassed about that or anything. Sometimes these things do pile on top of each other and they're just too hard to manage. And I know for blokes, sometimes we might struggle with that, but for me, I at least had some awareness that I needed some support and engagement. So I went out there, got some support through occupational health, which is a work kind of based support.
Yeah.
And I engaged with what we call a cognitive behavioral program as well to address our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's something that we actually require our offenders to do in the criminal justice system. Actually, one of the most effective interventions, actually, by the way. So I
Okay.
knew I needed that extra support. So yeah, through them traumatic experiences, recognizing how the martial arts help probably as much as anything else, the criminal justice system and maybe not having that effect and not knowing what fundamental difference I was making after 25 years, they were kind of the influence that led me to move on to this next stage of my life. And at the end of the day, I was starting to absolutely love it, particularly once I was helping people, I was changing, I was feeling better, other people were getting them benefits that I could see. So I thought, let's give it a go.
Yeah. I think when you're doing something like you're making those policy changes and you're putting it out and it's helping loads of people, but you can't necessarily see the people you're helping, that can be quite difficult. And you're not getting that return, like just confirmation of what you're doing is making a change. And ultimately, that's what we're all striving towards, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Um, and yeah, like the difficult, obviously there's quite a condensed period, like you said, that must have been really difficult. And it's good that you talk about seeking help for that. And because I think a lot of people don't, and it's okay to admit that things happen in life where it just piles up and it piles up and it's one after the other. And it probably feels in that moment that everything's just going wrong, like every other turn. As soon as you start to get through one bit, another thing goes. So yeah, and obviously the altercation with the police as well, like you said, that obviously you don't have to go into detail, but that sounds like quite a difficult thing, especially again given what you were doing in the civil service. So
Yeah, it really was.
how did those experiences, did they alter your mindset at all? How did you sort of push through them? Obviously with the help you sought, but what else was there?
Yeah, so I mean, I talked about some of the interventions, but it was to use another phrase. It was a real shift in mindset. Really, it was that it was about for me. It was much more than recognizing when you do need support, not to be frightened of it. There's always other people out there that kind of can help and know better than
Mm.
you. And I'm quite confident in that sense. And as I said, quite academic, and I like research and evidence. So sometimes I think I can research and evidence out of everything, and you can't.
Mm.
And I think with my particular method, we talk about different pillars around the sort
Okay.
of biological, physiological, social, and also spiritual as well, neurological obviously as well, sorry, but also spiritual. So I am a sort of I'm loose, sort of loose Christian. I don't sort of belong to any of the main faiths, as it were, but I have that kind of faith or that belief. And I think during COVID as well, and during these traumatic experiences, there was a kind of spiritual aspect as well, which helped me kind of understand the bigger picture, that there's
Mm.
something a bit maybe bigger than what's going on. And I suppose to some extent as well, recognizing that maybe these experience, there is a reason for that, that kind of bigger understanding.
Mm.
Um, and I think I use some of that through that kind of spiritual connection and through that understanding of that bigger picture. Because in life, we doesn't matter how great your life is, we always seem to go through some ups and downs. It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
This was an extreme
Yeah.
example, but even without that, you kind of go through different periods in life which just seem to be, quite challenging, and you're struggling a bit with your mood, or you're a bit angry, or you're arguing with someone every morning. You think you're fine, but every morning you're arguing with six people on the way to work in your car, and you're still saying I'm fine, you're probably not.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there was that bigger picture kind of thinking, because I look back now and I think probably had to go through that. That probably was a journey that I had to go through. So, when it comes to the health, for example, now I share my experience with loads of men. So I'm hoping, this I haven't got measures on this actually, but I am hoping that even just through sharing these stories might help 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 50, 100 men say, oh, you know what? I felt something a bit weird down there the other day. Maybe I should go to the GP to get that checked. So I hope that would have that
Yeah.
sort of benefit. My friend suffering this horrific injury, and my auntie having the degradation of her brain through dementia, as horrific and awful as both them incidents are, I have now gone on to develop a real understanding and knowledge of the brain and neurological health. And now it's a fundamental
Mm.
aspect of my program. And every male that certainly joins my total rejuvenation mastery program, or even just goes to the website to get free resources, you'll see lots of free resources on brain health. So again,
Mm.
if I could help 1, 2, 5, 10, 200 people understand a little bit more about their brain health, what they can do about it. Most people don't know anything about their brain. They don't know if it's in good
Yeah.
condition, if it works well, whether they can do anything about it, how they can change it for the better. The average person has not got a clue. So I think that's one of my roles, to help them understand a little bit more about their brain health. Um, and to help them to do things about it to make it run more efficiently and effectively, potentially for the rest of their life.
Mm. What can people do to see where their brain health's at? Is there anything simple and straightforward they can do straight away?
Yeah, so I'll probably share some details later anyway, but I've got loads of free
Hmm.
resources on just basic information on the brain itself and kind of what it does. Um, Lots of work on prevention, and there's lots of work on optimizing brain health. So it will be things like exercise, various forms of exercise, quality
Yeah.
nutrition, because the brain takes about 25% of every calorie we intake. So obviously, the better quality we're
Okay.
putting in, it will function better.
Hmm.
If I had to highlight one nutrient or supplement, I would absolutely say high quality omega-3 supplement. Long as you're not on any other supplements and you're not on any medication, you can start that straight away. If you are on any medication, though, particularly if it's anything to do with mental health or anything like that, I would certainly go to the GP first. But yeah, if I picked out three things: better quality nutrition, omega-3 supplement, and just a general better diet. Now, I know that's not easy for people, but even what I try with my clients, I associate it with the exercise themselves. So if you want to do 6 days of crap, I don't really like that. But on the day that you exercise, at least you would try and eat something healthy prior or after that exercise. So we just start gradually. Most times, not for
Yeah.
everyone, but most people, the step by step progress approach usually is the best way forward.
I just want to ask about, again, go back to your IMA. So obviously it's quite recently started, sort of 6 months or so. Where do you see that going? Where do you want it to go in the future? Do you have any big goals for it, or is it just something that you're enjoying to do and you'll just go along with the ride?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite sort of structural, so I've always got some sort of plan or some sort of vision, if you like. So for me, I would like to establish it from a kind of regional, local perspective, which I think I've probably done to some extent. So most people in the community now know who I am and what I do, and talk to me and get little tips, and I can send them information and that type of thing. So that's kind of step one, almost achieved. Then I would like to sort of spread it internationally. So
Mm.
most of my main program work is online. We do a little bit of face-to-face stuff with local people, again in sort of Hertfordshire area, but for wider national perspective, it's online. So
Yeah.
I really want to grow that from a national perspective, and then on to internationally. Really, I just want that approach where all middle-aged men can do some small aspect of a martial art that can help improve their strength, flexibility, and well-being.
Mm.
Because if you look at some of the examples I've given, virtually everything I've done that I've enjoyed, stuff I didn't enjoy, I didn't go very far, no one knew anything about it. But most of the stuff I've enjoyed, whether that was the Vauxhall story, managed to get that health and safety issue managed. That was a national basis, and onto an international engagement with high level executives from Germany and Detroit. And then if you look at my probation career, when I got nominated for national awards to be in the probation officer of the year. So I know that whatever I do that I have a passion for, that I'm pretty good at, I've always succeeded at national stroke international level. So I have a real passion for this. So that would be my aim, eventually would be from the local, national to some global context spread.
Right. Yeah, you can tell that you're very passionate about it, and you can tell you care a lot about the details of it
Care.
and that evidence-based thing that you're talking about and you've mentioned throughout. You can see that coming across in the way you talk. So that's really nice.
Excellent. I'm glad to
Um,
hear it.
yeah, and I wish you all the best with it. Um, I think that's a nice place to end today, to be honest. And I just want to thank you again for coming on. Thank you for talking about everything you've explained to us and things you've opened up about yourself as well. It's really hopefully helping a lot of people listening. If people want to follow what you're doing online and stay up to date, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, thanks for giving me the opportunity as well, Sam. Because this is obviously a platform that gives some national exposure.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I want. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, really simple. DaveFergusonCoach.com is my website. And you can pretty much go from there, really. You can
Hmm.
find all my social media accounts from there, including my Facebook group, IMA Wellbeing and Support Group, which is just a sort of more of a social gathering. We share lots of information, a bit of humor there. It's, of course, free. Lots of free resources. I think we've got over 50 free resources there. Things about brain health. Got ebook on the most complex organ in the universe and how you can change it. That's your brain, just in case you haven't been listening, guys. Um, and also, you got access if you want to book a call, maybe just to talk a little bit more about some of the things we spoke about today, or some of your particular maybe needs and challenges as middle-aged men that I might be able to help and support you with. And I was going to offer Sam 5 free brain summary screenings for your listeners. So if anyone does get in contact through the website, if you do book a call, if you just put Sam in brackets,
Hmm.
then I'll know obviously you come through this route. And as part of the courtesy call, you will also get a free brain summary screening as well, just to see your kind of brain type, really, and to some extent, the health it's in at the moment as well. And then, if anything, we can then go on to the next stage about potentially doing something about that. So, yeah, DaveFergusonCoach.com, you will find everything there.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very kind as well. So, yeah, if anyone is listening and wants to get involved, then you've just heard the way to do it. I'll put those in the description as well below. And if you have enjoyed the show today, if you share it with someone who you think may find some value from it, if you can rate the show if you haven't already, and also you can follow us on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly, from me, thank you for listening.